Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wolfer TV. I'm Hillary Richard, and today I'm going to be interviewing Jessica Lahey about her new book, The Addiction Inoculation, Raising Healthy Kids in a Culture of Dependence. That's the cover. We're going to talk to Jessica about it, and then we're going to encourage you all to go and buy it and implement its tips. Jessica, just by way of background, she writes about education, parenting, and child welfare for The Atlantic, The Washington Post, and The New York Times. She had a book, I'm sorry, I turned off my notifications, but somehow it's not working. And Jessica's book, The Gift of Failure, How the Best Parents Learn to Let Go so Their Children Can Succeed, was a New York Times bestseller. We're certainly hoping that The Addiction Inoculation is a Times bestseller too. So welcome, Jessica. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So Jessica, tell us, why did you write this book now? Why now?
So there's always that, like, what are you going to write for the second book, especially when the first book has been successful? There's like the inevitable, what are you working on now question. Right. And for a long time, I've been having a great time traveling around talking about Gift of Failure all over the place and sending my agent ideas here and there. And she kept saying, no, it's not quite it yet. And, I have this June, I hopefully will have 8 years of recovery from alcohol abuse. I'm an alcoholic. And I have 2 boys. And after my boys are 22 and 17 now. Wow. And they, they were born with the genetic predisposition for substance abuse. That's the way this works. They sort of have genetics is about 50 to 60% of the picture. I was born with that genetic predisposition. I have lots of substance abuse in my side of the family on both my mom and dad's side, and on my husband on both his mom and dad's side. So my kids, really got it from both sides. And then on top of that, I had stopped teaching full-time and was teaching part-time in a drug and alcohol rehab for adolescents. So I spent 5 years working with kids who landed in that rehab classroom because usually because of trauma, because of their genetic predisposition, because of undiagnosed learning issues. And I really first, I guess, selfishly for my own children, wanted to understand what it means when the experts say substance abuse is preventable. But I also kept looking at my students and wanting to understand sort of where things went wrong for them, where things could have gone right, what we could have done for them to change their trajectory. So I spent a couple of years researching what really works in substance abuse prevention, and getting at how we can keep kids from needing to use that first time and what it's going to take.
So that is really a gold mine of genetic predisposition in your family, like in terms of your kids, and how have they fared so far? Okay.
Everyone's doing great. We have a talk. What's so funny is my younger son, when he was in a biology class recently, the teacher was polling the class and said, raise your hand if your parents ever talk to you about substance abuse or drugs and alcohol. And my kid was like, when don't they talk to me about substance abuse? Because, just as I bet you Peggy Orenstein's kids are like, oh my gosh, can we not talk about sex for like 1 minute? My kids get it all the time, but I can't afford not to. And, both the sex talk and the substance abuse talk, those are really, and the porn talk, I suppose, are really touchy subjects for parents. It's really hard, but the only way those become easier is by having a lot of them.
Yeah. And they're touchy for kids too, in my experience. Like it's a hard conversation to broach with children. So you said something, and this was a question I was going to ask you anyway, but you said towards the end of your first answer, how do you prevent them from taking their first sip or, I suppose, puff or snort or whatever it is? And in the first couple of chapters, I got the sense that what you were saying was really that they should never experiment. Now, I've raised 3 kids. My youngest is 16. My oldest is 27. That ship has really completely sailed for me. But is that really what you're saying? Like never, ever, not a sip, not a puff?
Yeah. So the research, I'm coming at this from a couple of angles. And number one, there is a foregone conclusion sort of out there among many people that there is no way to prevent kids from experimenting. And while it is true that kids are wired for novelty. It is really, and sometimes wired for risk, but really just wired for novelty. Their baseline levels of dopamine are lowest during adolescence, lower even than young children and adults. The key thing I think it's important to point out is that the longer we can delay the first use, the more we can protect their brains from the damage that happens during adolescence. I'm not talking about during adulthood. There's all kinds of stuff that, adults can do, and it's, the relative harm is much lower than during adolescence. There's this period of plasticity in the adolescent brain, and it is uniquely sensitive to substances, to outside environmental influences. So the longer we can prevent that first use, not only the more we can protect their brains, we can also lower with each passing year their rate of possibly getting, suffering from substance use disorder as an adult. And also research shows that it's parents who have a clear, consistent message of no, not until it is legal, that raise kids with the lowest levels of substance use disorder. So for my kids, that means that my older kid was raised in a family where we let him have sips of wine and beer. We let him, there's a passage in the book about the fact that I actually I dipped my finger in some wine and put it on my infant baby's tongue, because it was a really nice bottle of wine. And now we have a 17-year-old who's being raised in a home where our rules are no, not until it's legal. And, for him, he's like, well, that's unfair. But from my perspective, I'm modeling for them what I hope that is their attitude as human beings, which is I do the best I can. And if I learn something new that seems like it's evidence-based and it seems like it's good solid research, then and it works, I'm going to change my approach based on that research. So we've ended up in a family with kids raised under two different philosophies. So
I think that's sort of inevitable. I mean, on some level, I have three girls. My third daughter does stuff that I never in a million years would let the first or second do. Some of it's just fatigue, honestly,
Yeah.
As long as she's not lighting the house on fire, I'm pretty, she's not shooting heroin, I'm pretty happy.
Well, I mean, what's interesting is if you look at, an eighth grader, if a kid in eighth grade tries drugs and alcohol, their lifelong risk for substance use disorder is about 50%. But if we can get them just to 18, we can get it down to 10%, which is really what it is in the general population in terms of, those people who are wired like I am, which is, if I have that first drink, Lord knows what's going to happen afterwards. I can't stop once I've had the first one.
Yeah, that's pretty much, I think, the definition of an alcoholic. So a couple of things. I was really fascinated. A lot of this stuff is stuff I know I've heard as a parent, like just try and get them to wait. The longer you can wait, the better. Especially, I think, if your kids have mental health issues, which is 25% of this adolescent population, that's probably an underestimate. That's the number I've seen. And especially if kids are on medication for mental health issues or, ADD or something along those lines, not neurotypical, then I think drugs can really, or alcohol can really have an impact that's even greater than on a kid who's not suffering those circumstances. But what I hadn't heard, and I was fascinated by, that you just mentioned, was that the dopamine levels in adolescents are lower than they are for children and for adults.
Yeah.
So I hadn't heard that before. So how does that impact their desire to use drugs or to drink, or the ultimate effect of taking drugs or drinking?
Learning that was so helpful to me. One of the things, as a teacher, as a parent, I love any opportunity to be able to understand better how to communicate with adolescents and how adolescents think and what causes them to make the decisions that they do. I mean, I love that stuff. So understanding that when teenagers say, I'm so bored, that they're not just being dramatic. They really, dopamine is about motivation. Dopamine is what fuels our motivation and our sort of drive to go do stuff and to be present in the world. And, when you have a low level of dopamine, you just don't feel excited, happy, want to get out there and do stuff. So it's not actually that they're being dramatic. It's actually due to the lower level of dopamine. And combine that with the fact that the purpose of adolescence really is to get kids away from us, like to help them individuate, become their own people, go out in the world, try things that are maybe riskier, especially emotionally risky for them, to go out and try new things so that they can be adults who can later on, protect children and families and, be competent out there in the world. So when you combine the fact with combine this lower dopamine level and the sort of predisposition to a little bit of boredom with the fact that they also crave novelty and sometimes some risk as adolescents, then you have a situation in which, kids are sitting around feeling kind of bored and they're looking for anything to sort of, feel more alive, whether that's riding a roller coaster, whether that's driving fast, whether that's, leaping off the garage into the pool or taking a hit of something. So I think the thing that I tried to do with this book is say, look, I do not want parents to feel shame or guilt or feel like, oh, great, I'm divorced, therefore, because divorce and separation are actually a risk factor for substance abuse. The last thing I want to do is make parents feel guilty or shamed, because shame and guilt is what landed me in the position, I think, of needing to drink, because there was just so much shame and secrecy around drinking when I was little. So for me, my only choice is to be frank and honest and open, to help parents understand what their individual child's risk factors may be in great detail. So to empower those parents to say, okay, so if here's what I'm dealing with on this scale of risk and protection, if my kid's risk side is super heavy, I'm going to have to load down that prevention side and what preventions might work best for my kids. So rather than, just heap a lot of information out there and make parents feel like there's 10 times more things they have to do now, I even give them scripts. I give everybody scripts. If this stuff is challenging to talk about, here are some scripts. Here are some really useful tools that you can use moving forward.
You just mentioned risk factors, and you have a whole chapter, maybe even longer, on risk factors and protection factors or protective factors. What do you call them? And I thought that was really interesting, because I think most of us are pretty familiar with risk factors, certainly genetics and, and the like. But, and I know one of the protective factors that you mentioned is something my family, for example, has always practiced, which is family dinner. We dinner together basically every single weeknight. Certainly during COVID, nobody was going anywhere, but even non-COVID times, it's just always been our practice. And obviously, if we were to go out one night every now and again, that's no big deal. What are some of the other lesser known protective factors that you could maybe tell our listeners about that would be helpful for them?
So you mentioned family dinners, and I want to sort of clarify that family dinners, we in our family, even during COVID, we don't have dinner together every single night. And I don't want people to feel guilty about if their kids are in athletics and they can't, practice schedules make it so they can't do that. I see the whole family dinners idea, which originally came out of some research from what's now called the Partnership to End Addiction, showing that kids who have family dinner more often, the more often you have family dinner together, the lower your risk for substance use disorder is. And obviously there's some causation correlation issues. There's also some confounding issues there, such as, people who are more likely to prioritize things like family dinner and communication obviously would be talking more and therefore reduce the risk. But I see family dinners as actually emblematic of any sort of regular opportunity to sit down and talk to each other and check in with each other, look each other, be in each other's faces, and talk about stuff that gets past, the, hey, how was school today? Fine. That kind of stuff. So there's those regular check-ins, which obviously is also part of communication, which is the reason that the excerpt that's actually at the Washington Post right now from the book is about a family dinner thing that we did in order to get my extremely recalcitrant, the hot wings. My kids, they keep themselves to themselves, and they like their privacy. And so it can be really hard to get information out of them. And so one thing I did was I took a show that we all love as a family, which is Hot Ones, which runs on the First We Feast network. And starring Sean Evans. And he interviews celebrities who are normally really good at evading questions and defensive, and he throws them off their game by having them eat increasingly hot wings, a series of 10. And with each wing comes a question. And of course, by the time you get to the end, you're just dying and sweating. And,
you're begging for some milk.
So we did that at our house. We created 10 questions for both of the kids, and not meant to invade their privacy, that kind of thing, just to get them to share things about themselves and sort of conversation starters. We laughed. By the end of it, we were, by the way, drinking liquefied ice cream. Our mouths were just burning off. But I ordered all the sauces that Sean Evans uses on the show. And we had this incredible opportunity, this incredible dinner where not only did we talk about stuff we never talk about, we also just laughed and it was an incredible bonding experience, because I showed the kids that we were willing to come to them on their terms. Because when I go to schools and I talk to kids, I get to talk to thousands of kids a year. Mm-hmm. And when I talk to them about what they want their parents to know, one of the things they tell me consistently is, I do want to talk to my parents. I really do. I just don't want to talk about the stuff they want to talk about all the time, which is usually like, how did that French test go? Have you signed up for the SAT yet? What are your classes? What are your, blah, blah, blah. They don't want to talk about school all the time. They want to talk about other stuff. And when we make that space, as family dinner does, we can make space for those. So communication, things that help with communication. And then on top of that, there's obviously things like early intervention for learning issues is essential. Early intervention for child-on-child aggression. When a kid is being socially ostracized when they're young, that's a risk for substance abuse. And obviously these things can get all tangled up in each other. Yeah. But when we notice that a kid, and early intervention for learning issues and hyperactivity disorder, there's a lot of research out there that makes it pretty clear that we know what the risk factors are, and we have to address them as they come up, not, waiting till later. And so I give a bunch of resources for how to do that as well.
So it's funny that, we want to talk about things that kids don't want to talk. My youngest daughter always, rolls her eyes, understandably so, because I do the same thing over and over again. But she'll see somebody, like, let's say it's just beginning of the school year, and she sees her good friend who she hasn't seen all summer. And I say, oh, how was so-and-so's summer? And she's like, we don't talk about things like that. Okay. I'm sorry. Does she have all of her limbs, her toes and fingers intact? But anyway, so what I'm hearing you say, because I think this is important, there are certainly a lot of families where one parent might have a job that doesn't, permit them to be home for dinner.
Of course.
Or a single parent who's working 2 jobs or something. So, but what I'm hearing is you're just saying you need to have some sort of routine where you lay eyes on each other and you have an opportunity to talk. It could be breakfast.
Yeah. And what's interesting is so in my first book, Gift of Failure, when I was talking about sports, one of the things I learned was that when serious adult athletes are asked about their experience in youth sports, ask what their favorite and least favorite and most favorite part of youth sports are, that their least favorite part of youth sports was the ride home from big games with their parents. And the reason they disliked it had to do with all the sort of coaching that the parent was doing and critiquing and criticizing and stuff like that, because their most favorite part of youth sports is actually when their grandparents come to watch them play, because they talk about the fact that their grandparents are interested in just being there and seeing the kid play and aren't as interested in the critique. So what's so fascinating to me is these car drives, especially when kids are doing the sports where you have to travel, that car time is really valuable, car and communication time, especially since, as many teachers know, sometimes when you can't get a kid to talk to you, if you can be side by side with them and not making eye contact, you can get some great conversation going. It's the other reason that a lot of our family's sex talks happened on chairlifts. We used to live down the street from the Dartmouth Skiway, so we could walk and ski up there. And a lot of those talks happened. My husband took the lead on most of those, sitting side by side with our sons, and they're captive. They can't jump off. They can't leap out of the moving car, and you're stuck there. And there's time to get past that sort of, the surface conversation that doesn't usually
And
provide much
I've
information.
read that walking side by side, I hadn't really thought of chairlift,
Mhm.
but that any time when you
Mhm.
didn't have to look you in the eyes if you want to have
Yeah.
a difficult conversation. So I have 3 girls, so I had all the sex talks. And fortunately they go to school with a very vibrant health program, so much of it they already knew. But
Congratulations, because not a lot of them are. So fantastic.
yeah, no, they have a really incredible health program. And it starts very young. But
Mhm.
I found that the best time for conversation was always when I was up in bed with them in the dark and I'd give them a little massage
Mhm.
or whatever.
Yeah.
It's dark. It's the same sort of
Yeah.
thing. They can't see your face. They're not
Yeah.
embarrassed. Or if they are, you can't tell.
For us, it's repeat viewings. My kid in particular, my younger kid in particular, is a fan of repeat watchings of films he really, really loves. And
Mhm.
so I'll often go watch that film for the third time with him, because you can have conversations during it because you're not going to miss something. And
Right.
it sort of lulls you into this place of, I don't know, it lulls us into a place of sort of shared interest and interesting conversation.
Well, one tip that you had in your protective factors that I very much learned only with my second kid, and it's a lesson that I think has been incredibly helpful for my parenting, my child raising, that I think every parent should be aware of is, you have this whole section, you're like, well, listen, and then it's listen without an agenda.
Mhm.
And it was really my middle kid who I'm one of those people who I'm competent. I want to fix everything. You have a problem. No, you're not going to have it for long.
Yeah.
Let me at it.
Yeah.
And with my middle daughter, she would just, spew at night like this, about this and about that. And I would go into overdrive on how we could fix all these things. And she just got increasingly more agitated and frustrated. And I got increasingly upset. And we finally had a therapy session together. And the therapist said, she doesn't want you to help. She just wants you to
She
hear
don't listen. I
her.
know.
And I
There's
was
a
like,
great,
what?
yeah. I use that. I'm gonna reveal the fact that I'm 50 by saying that there's an example that I love from the movie White Men Can't Jump, where Rosie Perez is talking with Woody Harrelson in this
Mhm.
scene where they're in bed together, and she mentions that she has a dry mouth and he wants to go get her the glass of water, and she makes it very clear. She gets very angry. She's like, I don't want you to fix it for me. I just want you to sympathize with my dry mouthedness. And that's, I think part of being a teacher, what's been helpful for me as a teacher is that half of the time, maybe more, when kids raise their hand in class, what they need for me is to stand next to them and listen while they work out something that they're trying to deal with, whether
Mhm.
it's not understanding something, or it's a matter of rereading the instructions or whatever. Most often they need for me to just listen while they work it out for themselves. And, it wasn't until I was probably a decade into teaching that I realized that my job was not to fix everything for them. And believe me, I would love to fix all of my students' problems. That would make me so happy. But my job, that's not my job. My job is to help them learn how to fix the problems for themselves. And so that requires me to be, an empathetic listener,
Right.
and not so much a fixer. And that drives me nuts because I want to fix all my own kid stuff. And I've found actually in recent years, my 22-year-old has revealed a few episodes when he on purpose didn't tell me about a big screw up that he made, not because he was worried that I would get mad, but because he knew that I could very easily fix it and he wanted to be able to fix it himself.
Well, that's
And
impressive.
that for me, the first time that happened, and it was a big screw up too, and it was something that was going to have ramifications over the next couple months, and he fixed it on his own. And that moment when he was able to tell me after the fact and explain how he fixed it, the pride in this kid's face was
Mhm.
huge. And I wouldn't have had that opportunity if, my goals hadn't been for sort of this self-efficacy and, helping them become more competent rather than trying to fix things for them all
Well,
the
I
time.
wish I would have known that. I'm glad I learned it, so I could practice it in the middle of the second one's life and then for the third one.
We
Uh,
do better as we learn and go
yeah, and
along.
I feel like it's often the case in in our adult relationships too. I mean, I find my husband does it sometimes, and I'm like,
Yeah.
stop! I'm not asking for suggestions.
It's been a challenge in my marriage. My husband and my parents-in-law are all people who tend to think things out very clearly before they open their mouths, whereas I'm the exact opposite. I open my mouth and just hope it works out, whatever comes out.
Yeah.
And my husband has come to understand that when I talk about, moving to South America, I'm not saying we're going to start packing. I'm just talking about what it might be like to move to South America. That's taken a while for us to figure out in our marriage. We've been married for 25 years now. And I feel like it's only been in the second half of those 25 years that he's finally figured that out.
Well, I think that's one of the greatest things that, a parent can do for a kid is really just hear them, hear them and empathize with them.
One of the things that I really learned from, I reference in the book, I heard Chris Herron speak one time, and he was one of the Boston Celtics. He was also addicted to opiates. And he speaks at a lot of schools. He speaks to a lot of kids. And one of the quotes I use in the book that I'm so grateful for, because it really changed the way I think about substance abuse, is we tend to really focus on the last day, how horrible it was, how deep you fell, blah, 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 how low you fell. And we tend to not think about the first day. Why a kid, when he's hanging out with his friends in a basement, doesn't feel like he is enough in that moment, or like he needs to impress someone, or like he needs to have liquid courage, or whatever that thing is. Because I can tell you, the drink that I miss the most now, that I can't have, and is just the one that I would love to be able to have, is the one right before I go to a dinner party or something like that, so that I could get over that feeling of being an imposter, of not being enough, of, how dare I feel like I have any place here at this party with these amazing people who have accomplished so much. That liquid courage stuff is so tempting. And for many kids who don't feel like they're enough, who don't feel like they have fulfilled expectations, or don't feel like they have the instruction manual to the world figured out, those kids often reach for that first substance so that they can feel like themselves, but more. And my goal in all of my teaching and all of my writing is to help kids feel like they are enough the way they are, that we parent the kids we have, not the kids we wish we had, and that our kids feel loved and supported for who they are. And if we can do that, and that's a big part of this book, and it dovetails with the message from Gift of Failure, is, how do we help our kids feel like they are enough so that they don't have to reach for something to either numb out, escape, or try to feel like they're more than. That's the core message there.
That's a beautiful message.
Thank you.
So, Jessica, we have to wrap up, but I have to ask you, because, every girl, look, what are you working on now?
So I learned something with my last book. With my last book, it published, and I just spent all my time refreshing, my ratings at Amazon and trying to figure out how many books we're selling. I figured the best defense this time around against going crazy around stuff like that is jump straight into my next project. So actually, my agent and I have been working on my proposal for my third book. It's about to go off to my editor, and I'm really excited to start working on it. I've actually been doing the research. I host a podcast called #AmWriting with two other best-selling authors. And so we're constantly working on the podcast and interviewing cool guests. And so, yeah, that's the stuff I'm working on. I'm looking forward to a summer of big dorky research and some gardening and recording some really great podcast episodes.
That sounds great. And I think everyone can get The Addiction Inoculation wherever they get their books, their local book.
They can. And if they would like a signed copy, if they would like to go local, please do. Indy, if you would like a signed copy, there are 2 bookstores here in Vermont that I go in and sign books, and then they ship them out. So you can get a personalized copy. So if you go to jessicalahey.com, my website, right on the front page one is the Vermont Bookshop and one is Phoenix Books, and there are links to both places there, so you can get your book from them.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, and thanks for this work.
By
the way, everybody who's listening, the stories that you tell in here about the kids that you teach were so profoundly moving to me, really.
I'd love to do a shout out really quickly. Brian and Georgia, the 2 main kids that I talk about, they're not kids, they're adults now. I gave them about 10 different outs to try to use fake names. Those are their real names. And they felt it was really, really important that they represent themselves with their real names, because they have been through hell, and they figured that the way to make that hell worth it is to help someone else. And so Georgia and Brian, I am so deeply indebted to them for their stories.
Your love for them really came through. And I'm
They're
glad
amazing
that they're
people.
both doing well.
They are
thank
both
you, Jessica.
doing well.
Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Look forward to hearing about your third.
Thank you.
Okay.